That was a hell of a song. That Jade sure can play. This didn't have to happen, you know. Back up. The knowledge comes with a cost.
What is up, everybody? Jeremy Eisenfire here, and welcome to the channel. Season 3 not only revealed quite a few startling details about our survivors of Fromville, but we were also left with a ton of new questions hanging in the balance as well. Not the least of which is, who is this mysterious man in yellow, and what role is he ultimately going to play in the rest of the series? And is he ultimately the one pulling all the strings behind the scenes? And if so, just how exactly are our townsfolk going to rise up and combat this formidable new threat that has risen up? And what other devastating surprises does he have around the corner? And was Jim potentially just the first in a very long line of new casualties that is yet to come? Which I believe will ultimately be the case in Season 4, as I believe they are also getting ready to head into their darkest season yet. And after some of the horrific events of Season 3 and our town's morale being at an all-time low, I'm starting to wonder if all of this was in preparation to land one final devastating blow against the town, in the form of a new massacre. But before we find out what's coming in the future, we first need to take a look at the past and determine just what exactly caused the previous massacre in the first place, and have there been any other massacres in any of the previous reincarnations. In the Season 3 finale, we learn that Tabitha and Jade are reincarnations of Miranda and Christopher who came before them, and how all four of them are reincarnations of two of the original Ankui parents, who have seemingly been cursed to be reincarnated generation after generation, always ending up back in Fromville to try and fix the mistake they failed to fix the first time around, and save the children from being sacrificed. But just how similar are all of these previous cycles that have come before them, and do they all tend to end in a similar manner? With the monsters facilitating a massive massacre at the end of each cycle to reset the board, and to keep the reincarnations from stopping the cycles altogether. Could it potentially be that every time a cycle gets closer and closer to uncovering the truth about who they really are and what they really need to do to stop these cycles, a massacre comes around to wash everything clean? And could the man in yellow himself be the one orchestrating these massacres? After all, I am starting to believe that the man in yellow and the boy in white are on opposite sides of a grand cosmic chess match that is being played in the background for control of Fromville, with the man in yellow fighting to keep these cycles going, and the boy in white trying to break them. Which, if that is the case, it seems like the man in yellow has been pretty successful up until this point of ending each cycle before they figure out too much. And could this potentially explain what happened to Christopher and Miranda's cycle previously? Were one or both of them on the verge of discovering some vital information that could have helped them put an end to these cycles for good? Could that potentially be why Miranda was heading for the tower that night in the first place? Which also in turn could have prompted the man in yellow to facilitate yet another massacre to reset the board. And if that is the case, just how exactly has Victor been successful in being able to survive the previous cycle with him living all the way into the next one? And just how much does he really know about the nature of Fromville, and has he seen the man in yellow before? And could this ultimately be why Victor is so hesitant to reveal some of the information that he has yet to uncover? Does he know deep down that if he reveals too much to this next cycle, that the man in yellow will arrive once again and facilitate yet another massacre? I can't help but keep thinking about the scene between Victor and Jade in Season 2 when they are in the car junkyard, and how Victor was visibly shaken and afraid to reveal too much to Jade in that moment, almost as if he knew somebody was listening. Which could have been a little bit telling considering one of the lines that Victor did say to Jade, about how there are bad things here that make people do bad things. And could this potentially have been referring to what really happened to Christopher in the previous iteration? After all, we do find out in Season 3 that the boy in white at some point does visit Christopher and tells him just about everything he needs to know in terms of the Ankui children being sacrificed and how to potentially save them by going through the faraway tree. But for some reason, Christopher has a very angry response to this and doesn't believe anything the boy in white is telling him. Could Christopher's distrust for the boy in white have been what prompted the man in yellow to get inside of his head in the first place and manipulate him to his side? And could that ultimately be what led to Christopher's corruption in the first place? We did also hear from Victor that the night of the massacre, his mother came to him and Eloise and told them to hide somewhere where Christopher couldn't find them. Did Miranda potentially uncover too much information about the true nature of Fromville, and did she know that maybe this massacre was on the way and how Christopher was going to have a part in it? And could that also be why Miranda was in such a rush to get to the lighthouse that evening? Was she desperately trying to get there to save the Ankui children before the massacre took place, hoping that that would stop the man in yellow? Only to unfortunately get killed by Smiley just as she makes it to the faraway tree? And could this potentially explain why we see Smiley running in this scene where the monsters always tend to walk usually? After all, we have heard some of our characters like Kenny and even some of the creators behind From put an emphasis on the fact that the monsters never need to run because there's only so many places our townsfolk can hide. But in this case, did Miranda potentially pose a big enough threat to the Man in Yellow's plans or to the cycles continuing in general to warrant a switch up in tactics? Which in turn would have left virtually zero defense against the Man in Yellow facilitating this massacre. After all, there were no talismans back then to keep the people safe. And could Miranda uncovering this knowledge ultimately be what set all of this in motion? And could we be getting ready to see history repeat itself yet again with Jade and Tabitha after their revelations? After all, one of the first things the Man in Yellow says when he arrives is that knowledge comes with a cost. With that cost not only being the death of Jim, but the death of the entire town in the wake of another massacre. Was Jade uncovering the notes to the song and playing them in front of the faraway tree a signal to the Man in Yellow that it was time for him to enter the fray personally and reset the board yet again? And if so, has the Man in Yellow known that this moment would eventually arrive at some point? And could that even potentially explain some of the things that we saw in Season 3? Was the third season ultimately one giant preparation for this upcoming massacre? And could that begin to explain why we have been seeing some of the deep psychological torment of so many of our characters, Boyd included? Is Fromville trying to bring down the town's morale as low as possible to keep them utterly demoralized in the face of the oncoming slaughter that is yet to come, leaving them far less likely to be able to put a stop to it? After all, if I were planning something like this, Boyd would certainly be one of my first targets as well. And could this be specifically why they are trying to break him instead of just killing him and removing him off the board entirely? After all, killing Boyd would certainly leave the town far less likely to defend themselves, but keeping Boyd alive and seeing him being driven as low as possible and utterly broken would be far more demoralizing for the town in terms of them losing hope. And could hope potentially be a key factor in driving the Man in Yellow in the first place? Does the Man in Yellow need to feed on the town's hope, for lack of better terms, to sustain himself? And could this potentially be why we see so much psychological manipulation being employed throughout the show? Not just on Boyd, but on multiple of our characters. From Julie, Randall, and Mari being put through their shared trauma to break them down a little bit more, to the psychological manipulation of Jim and the repeated phone calls of a mysterious voice claiming to be his deceased son, and even the death of Tien Shen herself, which was not only devastating for Kenny, but was also the catalyst of sorts and the first in a long line of psychological trauma that the town would be putting Boyd through in Season 3 as well, with this being his most trying season yet. Not only due to the psychological attacks, but also to the attacks on his family as well, and even going so far as getting a good majority of the town to stop believing in him. It certainly seems like this is the lowest that Boyd has ever been driven ever since that fateful day when he was forced to take action against his wife Abby. Could all of this, including the death of Jim, been in an effort to soften the town up a little bit before the final massacre comes around? Did the playing of the song and the arrival of the Man in Yellow mark the beginning of the end for our townsfolk? Will they be able to pull out one last-ditch effort and triumph over the evil that is oncoming? Or will their severe lack of morale and readiness lead to them succumbing to the same fate of every previous cycle? And did they all end in massacres similar to the 1978 one as well? After all, the flashback we see in Season 1 of Jade being chased by the Civil War soldier and all of the strung-up bodies in the tree could have been remnants of a previous massacre in a previous cycle. And could another massacre potentially explain what befell the residents of the ruined settlement that we come across in Season 3 as well, with Jade's vision of the man with the railroad spike through his eye stuck to the tree potentially being a small glimpse of that massacre as well? And could these even be the reason for Jade's visions in the first place? Could someone or something be trying to warn Jade as to what happened to all of the previous cycles so he knows what to avoid during his timeline? And is Jade simply too afraid of these visions in order to interpret them correctly? If so, he's going to have to learn, and fast, to start seeing these visions through a more inquisitive eye instead of such a fearful one. And if he and Tabitha did just trigger the next massacre by playing the song and unlocking their memories, he's going to have to figure it out sooner rather than later. Because I get the feeling that the Man in Yellow is going to be their most formidable opponent yet, and I imagine he has a ton of tricks up his sleeve that he is getting ready to throw at the town of Fromville, so they really need to be ready now more than ever. Which could not be coming at a worse time for the townsfolk, as they seem to be incredibly demoralized after all of the psychological manipulation they faced in Season 3, and some of the heavy losses they incurred as well. And perhaps that's exactly what the Man in Yellow wanted in the first place, to soften the town up so they would not be ready for the massacre that is yet to come. Whatever the case, it certainly seems like Season 4 is primed to be their darkest hour yet, and I get the feeling we are going to see a lot more of our townsfolk perish in this upcoming season. So if nothing else, it should be interesting to see if our townsfolk have what it takes to rise up and combat the oncoming threat, or if they will just end up becoming another failed cycle like all of the previous ones before them. But if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like on your way out, and consider subscribing to stay up to date on all of our upcoming From content. And as always, keep those tinfoil hats on, folks, and I will see you on the next one.
It's a sign.
What if they don't come back?
What if that was our only chance to go home?
What if I wasted the only opportunity we're gonna get?
What if I'm lost? No one ever finds me.
What if it's not over? What if all this is happening for a reason?